My name is Raymond Holt, and I was 63 years old the evening my wife's family sat across from me at a white linen table and decided, in the space of 4 minutes, exactly what kind of man I was. The restaurant was called Maison Ferrara. It sat on the corner of Delancey and West Elm in the old part of the city, where the street lamp still had the iron curlicues from the original installation in 1947. I had eaten there the first time when I was 26, at a table by the window, with $8 in my wallet and a job interview the next morning. I remembered the way the bread smelled when it came out of the kitchen. I remembered thinking that someday I would own something that smelled like that. They had no idea what was about to happen. Welcome back to Channel, where quiet patience always outlasts loud cruelty. If you've ever been the person in the room that everyone looked past, the one they sized up in 3 seconds and filed away as harmless, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My full name is Raymond Gerald Holt. I was 63 years old when the dinner happened, and I had lived in Carver City for all of it. Every season, every street, every restaurant that opened and closed on the downtown corridor over 4 decades. I had worked in the restaurant business since I was 19 years old, starting as a line cook at a diner on Marshall Street that no longer exists, where the owner paid me in cash on Fridays, and I walked home with grease on my forearms and enough money to cover rent and nothing else. My wife, Miriam, had passed 4 years before the night I am about to describe. She died on a Tuesday in February at 6:14 in the morning in our bedroom on Creston Lane, and I had been the one holding her hand when she went. We had been married 31 years. She knew everything about me. The work, the early mornings, the ledgers I kept in a green notebook on the kitchen table every Sunday night. She used to say that I was the only man she knew who could look at a balance sheet the way other men looked at a sunset. Our daughter, Claire, had met Daniel Mercer at a conference in the spring. She was 34. He was polished in the way that some men are polished. The right jacket, the right handshake, the right sentence ready before the last one was finished. He was the second son of Walter Mercer, who ran a regional insurance firm out north in the city and had opinions about everything, including, as I would learn, other people's worth. Claire called me on a Thursday evening in September, the year after she and Daniel had been dating seriously, and asked if I would come to dinner. Walter Mercer wanted to meet me. The whole family would be there: Walter, his wife Patricia, Daniel, and Daniel's older brother, Stephen. I said yes. I did not say anything else. The restaurant they chose was Maison Ferrara. I want to be precise about this because the choice matters. They chose it, not Claire. She told me later, when everything had settled, that Daniel's father had picked it specifically because it was the most expensive restaurant in the city and he wanted to see how I handled it. That was the word he used. Handle. I had been in the restaurant business for 41 years by that point. I had started with the diner on Marshall Street, then moved to management at a hotel kitchen on the east side, then taken out a loan in 1991 with a business partner named Gerald Fitch to open a small bistro on Crane Avenue. Gerald and I dissolved that partnership amicably in 1997 when he moved to Portland for family reasons. By then I had learned enough to go alone. I want to be specific about the labor because it matters to what came later. I drove to the commercial kitchen supply auction on Route 9 every other month for 11 years to source equipment at a fraction of retail cost, so that the money I saved would go back into staffing. I paid the health insurance premiums for 14 full-time kitchen employees out of operating income for 6 consecutive years before it was legally required, because Miriam said people who show up for you deserve to be shown up for. I spent every Saturday morning from 1998 to 2011 doing the weekly inventory myself. Not because I couldn't hire someone, but because I believe you had to know your own numbers before anyone else touched them. I renegotiated the produce contract with Hartley Farms on Sycamore Road every single spring, in person at their kitchen table for 19 years, so that both of us stayed solvent. By 2004, I owned 3 restaurants in Carver City. By 2009, I owned 5. By the time of the dinner, I owned 7, including Maison Ferrara, which I had purchased in 2011 from the original owner, a man named Emilio Ferrara, who was retiring and wanted the place to go to someone who understood what it cost him to build it. I kept all that quiet, not as strategy, not as calculation. It simply never occurred to me that it was information people needed until they needed it. My attorney, Leonard Marsh of Marsh & Associates on 14th Street, had structured all 7 properties under a holding company called GH Hospitality, LLC. My name appeared nowhere on the public-facing materials for any of the restaurants. The front-of-house managers, the reservation systems, the websites, all ran under the restaurant names. If you search Raymond Holt in Carver City, you found my voter registration and a charity 5K I had participated in with Claire in 2017. The sealed folder that Miriam had given me on our 20th anniversary, the one she had put together with Leonard as a kind of anniversary gift, an organized record of everything we had built together, sat in the fireproof cabinet in my home office on Creston Lane. I had not opened it since she died. I kept meaning to. I kept not being ready. I had my first conversation with Claire about the dinner on October 3rd at 7:30 in the evening at my kitchen table. The maples on Creston Lane had already turned. I could see them through the window over the sink, orange and deep red in the last of the light. "They're excited to meet you, Dad," she said. My throat was quiet. I nodded and poured her more coffee. The reservation was for October 17th, a Saturday, 7 o'clock. I arrived at Maison Ferrara at 6:52 that Saturday evening. The host at the door was a young man named Marco who had worked there for 3 years. He greeted me the way he greeted every guest, a nod, a smile, a practice welcome. I had trained the floor staff not to recognize ownership at the door. I wanted the experience to be consistent regardless of who walked in. The Mercer family was already seated. The table was in the center of the room, not the window table, not the corner, the center where you could be seen. Walter Mercer had requested it specifically. I learned this later from the reservation notes. The room smelled of brown butter and thyme. The candles on the tables were beeswax, which Emilio had used, and which I had kept because the light they gave was softer and warmer than paraffin. The background sound was low. Silverware, a murmured conversation 2 tables over, the faint movement of the kitchen behind the far wall. Walter Mercer stood when he saw Claire. He did not stand for me. He extended his hand across the table, which I reached for, and he gripped it briefly and firmly in the way men grip hands when they are measuring. "Raymond," he said. "Walter," I said. That was it. That was the whole of the first exchange. His wife, Patricia, smiled from across the table. She had the practiced warmth of a woman who had attended a great many dinners like this one and knew her role in them. Daniel was beside her, and Stephen Mercer sat at the far end, broader than Daniel, with the particular ease of a man who had never been in a room where he felt like the smaller one. We sat. The menus arrived. They were leather-bound, the cards inside printed in a typeface I had chosen myself in 2012 after 3 rounds of revision with the designer. Stephen opened his menu and said, without looking at me, "Beautiful place. You been here before, Raymond?" "Once or twice," I said. My voice was even. My hands were still on the table. "It's not cheap," he said. He said it pleasantly, as if it were a helpful observation. I said nothing. Walter ordered wine. He asked for a specific bottle, a 2014 Barolo, that retailed on our list for $340. He did the way men do when they want a room to know they know wine. The sommelier, a woman named Christine Park, who had been with the restaurant since 2014, brought it with exactly the correct amount of ceremony. "You drink wine, Raymond?" Walter said. "Sometimes," I said. Something in me went very still. Stephen looked at my menu, which I had closed and set down without opening. "You already know what you want," he said. "I think so," I said. "The tasting menu is extraordinary here," Walter said. 7 courses. It's what we're doing. He said it not as an invitation, but as an announcement of what the table was doing, and what I would be doing along with it or not. I looked at the server when she came, a young woman I knew was named Sasha, 26, working her way through a graduate program, and I asked for the soup and the bread course. The table went briefly quiet. Stephen looked up. "That's it. I had a late lunch," I said. It was not true, but it was what I said. Walter smiled, not at me, slightly past me, in the direction of Daniel. It was the kind of smile that contains a verdict. "Of course," Stephen said. Of course. Don't worry about it. We're covering the table. He said covering with a particular emphasis, the kind that is meant to sound generous and lands as something else entirely. I said nothing. Across the table, Claire's hands tightened around her water glass. I saw it. I kept my face still. The bread arrived. I broke a piece and ate it slowly. The crust had the right sound. It always had the right sound when the head baker, a man named Paolo Reinhold, who had been with me since 2013, was on shift. So Raymond, Walter said, setting down his wine, "What is it you do?" "I'm in the restaurant business." I said, "What aspect?" He said, "Operations, mostly." I said. He nodded slowly. "Front of house? Kitchen management?" "Something like that." I said. The silence lasted 2 seconds. Stephen said, "Daniel tells us you're retired?" I said. "Semi-retired from operations." Stephen repeated, with a tone that filed us away as a polite way of saying not much. "Good for you. Take it easy for a while." Something in my chest went very still. I looked at the bread in my hand. I thought about the conversation I had had with my accountant, Frank DeLuca of DeLuca Financial Partners on Commerce Street, the previous Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m., in which we had reviewed the Q3 numbers for the holding company and discussed a potential acquisition of a property on the east waterfront. I said nothing out loud. Patricia asked Claire about her work, and the table moved on, the way tables do when a subject has been classified and set aside. But Stephen was not finished. Between the second and third courses, Walter's second glass of Barolo. The room slightly warmer now with the evening crowd. Stephen looked at me again. "Can I ask you something, Raymond?" he said. "Go ahead," I said. "What made you choose a place like this for the first meeting?" "I mean, Claire mentioned you suggested it." He glanced at Daniel. That surprised me a little. No offense. Claire had not suggested it, but I did not correct him. "None taken," I said. "I just mean it's a significant check. I don't want you to feel obligated. We're happy to cover it." There was again, cover. My throat tightened once, then released. My voice stayed flat. "I appreciate that," I said. "Walter's been coming here for years," Stephen continued. "He knows the owner, actually, or knew him. Old Italian guy, right, Dad? Sold a while back." "Emilio," Walter said. "Good man. Built that place from nothing." He swirled his wine. "Shame what happens when the original vision walks out the door. These corporate buyers come in, and you never know what you're getting." I broke another piece of bread. I kept my voice completely level. "That's true of a lot of things," I said. Claire was looking at the tablecloth. At 8:47 p.m., after the third course had been cleared, Stephen said, "To the table," not to me specifically, but I was the one who was aimed at. "You know, Raymond, I'll say this. You're a gracious man. Most guys in your position would feel out of their depth in a place like this." He smiled, ordering the soup. That's confidence right there. The table had a brief sound that was not quite laughter. Something in me settled like concrete. I said, "Thank you, Stephen." That was all I said. Walter ordered dessert. Stephen ordered a digestive. I finished my bread. At 9:03 p.m., the check arrived. It was placed, as always, at the center of the table in a small black folder. Walter reached for it with the practiced ease of a man used to the gesture. He opened it. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. "Raymond," he said, "they've printed something here I don't understand." He turned the folder to show me. On the bill, above the itemized list, in the small printed header, where the table account number usually appeared, was a different notation. Something the front-of-house manager, a careful and precise man named Thomas Arden, had added to the account at 7:04 p.m., 9 minutes after I sat down. It read, "Owner, comp at discretion." Walter's face did not change expression, but something underneath it did. I had not planned to reveal anything that evening. That is the truth. I want to be precise about it because it matters to how I feel about what happened afterward. I sat in my car on the Delancey Street side at 9:21 p.m. after excusing myself briefly to get my coat from the hook by the door, a coat I had deliberately left there for this purpose, because I needed 60 seconds alone, and I thought about what Walter Mercer's face had looked like when he read that notation on the bill. The night air through the cracked windows smelled like the street after rain, clean and cold and slightly mineral. The street lamp above my car cast a long orange stripe across the passenger seat. I could hear the city settling. A distant horn, the click of heels on the sidewalk, the compression of traffic from the bridge 2 blocks east. I was not angry. That is the word people reach for in a moment like that, and it was not the right word for what I was. I was something quieter than that, something that had been sitting with me for a very long time, patient and specific, the way a number sits in a ledger, waiting for the column to balance. I thought about Miriam. I thought about the way she used to sit across from me at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, the green notebook open between us, going through the week's numbers together. She never asked me to explain them. She already understood them. She had understood them from the beginning, when we had nothing, when the first loan came through and we stood in the empty space on Crane Avenue, and she said quietly, "This is going to work." Not as a hope, as a statement of fact. I thought about what it had cost. Not in money. I knew those numbers exactly, but in the other currency, the Saturdays, the early mornings when Claire was small and I was out of the house before she woke up, the Thanksgivings I spent at the restaurant because a pipe burst or a chef called out sick, the holidays Miriam sat through alone, or with Claire, or with her own family, without complaint. She never complained. She understood what we were building. Walter Mercer had looked at me across that table and decided what I was worth in the time it took him to glance at my menu order. I did not resent him for it. People make assessments. It is a human thing. But I believe there was a cost of being publicly condescending to a man you have just met, and I believe that cost ought to be accurate. I sat in the car for 11 minutes. I came to a decision that was not dramatic and did not feel like a decision so much as a clarification. I was not going to hide anything. But I was also not going to announce anything. I was going to let the evening proceed and let the information come forward in its own time, because I found over 40 years in business that things said at the right moment landed differently than things said at the loud one. I went back inside at 9:32 p.m. I picked up my coat. I thanked Marco at the door. I returned to the table and sat down. Thomas Arden was standing nearby with the quiet readiness of a man who had worked with me long enough to know when to be present without being visible. He caught my eye once. I gave a small nod. That nod meant, let it happen naturally. He understood. The weeks after the dinner were, from the outside, entirely ordinary. Daniel and Claire continued seeing each other. There were 2 more family dinners, both at the Mercer House, a large colonial on Ashford Drive in the north quarter of the city, where the ceilings were high and the furniture was chosen by a decorator and everything smelled faintly of the same candle. I attended both. I was quiet at both. I asked Walter about his business. I listened carefully. I offered nothing about my own. Stephen, at the second dinner, asked me again about my work. He was slightly warmer this time, the warmth of a man who has decided you are harmless and is therefore comfortable being generous. "Still semi-retired?" he said. "More or less," I said. He nodded. "Good life if you can get it." I said nothing. My chest was steady. My hands were folded on my knees under the table. Claire told me afterward that her future father-in-law had described me to Daniel as perfectly pleasant. That was a phrase. Perfectly pleasant. The tone of it, as Claire reported it, was the tone of a man describing furniture that won't cause problems. I noted this and went home and sat at the kitchen table on Creston Lane and opened the green notebook. In November, Daniel and Claire got engaged. The announcement came on a Sunday afternoon. I drove to Claire's apartment, hugged my daughter for a long time, shook Daniel's hand, and meant both gestures. The engagement party was Walter's idea. He called me directly the week after the announcement. The first time he called me directly to discuss it. "We'd like to host it," he said. "Something significant. Claire deserves that." I agreed. She did deserve that. "We're thinking Maison Ferrara," he said. My attorney, Leonard Marsh, had called me the previous Tuesday, November 8th at 10:17 a.m. to discuss the renewal of the operating license for GH Hospitality, LLC. It was a procedural call, the kind we had every year. Nothing unusual. But during that call, Leonard had also reminded me that the GH Hospitality, LLC public filing was due for its biennial update, and that for the first time in 11 years. He believed it was appropriate to update the listed principal contact to reflect my full name rather than a management holding designation. I had told him to proceed. The updated filing was processed on November 14th by the City Business Registry Office. It was a public document. Walter Mercer called me on November 17th to confirm Maison Ferrara for the engagement party. "Wonderful choice," I said. My voice was completely steady. "I'll call and make the arrangements," he said. "Of course," I said. I said nothing else. At 9:42 a.m. on November 18th, my operations manager, a careful and thorough woman named Diana Reyes of GH Hospitality LLC, filed the updated seating plan and event package for the engagement party with the front-of-house team at Maison Ferrara. The paperwork, as always, went through the standard internal channels. It listed the event host as GH Hospitality LLC, Principal Raymond G. Holt. Thomas Arden received the paperwork at 10:05 a.m. and filed it in the event binder. In the third week of November, Walter Mercer called the restaurant to finalize the reservation. He spoke with the front desk. He gave his name. He was asked to confirm the event account holder. He called me back at 4:16 p.m. that afternoon. "Raymond," he said. There was a pause. A careful pause, the kind that contains a recalculation. I was making arrangements at Maison Ferrara today, and they asked me to confirm something with the account holder. Another pause. They said, "They told me the name on the account is GH Hospitality LLC, and the principal listed is Raymond Holt." I let that settle in the air. "Is that correct?" he said. "It is," I said. My voice was quiet, even, entirely ordinary. Silence on the line. "So you," he began. "We can talk more at the party if you'd like," I said. "Claire's going to love whatever you and Patricia put together for the room." He did not respond immediately. Something in the silence on that call told me he had gone back and replayed October 17th in his mind. The soup order, the bread, the notation on the bill, and was now doing the arithmetic. I let him do it. "Of course," he said finally. "Yes, of course." We said goodbye. I set down the phone. My hands were steady on the kitchen table. Outside, the maples on Creston Lane had lost the last of their leaves. The branches were clean against the sky. The engagement party was December 7th, a Saturday, 7 o'clock. The room had been set with a long center table for 40 guests, and smaller rounds along the perimeter for overflow. The flowers were white and pale green. The lighting was warm. Paolo Reinhold had been on shift since 4 a.m. for the bread and the pastry base. Diana Reyes had supervised the setup personally, arriving at noon. I arrived at 6:38 p.m. Marco greeted me at the door. "Evening, Mr. Holt," he said. "Evening, Marco." I said, "Everything set?" "Yes, sir," he said. I walked through the room once. I checked the temperature of the bread warmer. I straightened a napkin on the center table. Then I found my seat near the window where I had sat the first time I ever came here, 40 years before. The Mercers arrived at 6:55 p.m. Walter came through the door with the settled confidence of a man who had organized this event, who had called to arrange it, who had selected this restaurant. Patricia was beside him, lovely and composed. Stephen was with them. Walter saw me at the window table. He stopped, not dramatically. He simply stopped for the length of one full breath. Then he walked toward me. Thomas Arden appeared at Walter's elbow with the quiet precision of a man who had been briefed. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "welcome. Mr. Holt has asked us to take good care of you this evening." Walter's face went still. "Raymond," he said when he reached me. "Walter," I said. I stood. I shook his hand. "Thank you for putting this together. Claire's going to love the room." He looked around. He looked at the staff moving with the particular efficiency of a team in their own element. He looked at Thomas Arden, who gave a small, professional nod. He looked at the flowers, the lighting, the bread that was already on the tables. His hands were at his sides. "You own this restaurant," he said. It was not a question. "I do," I said. I said nothing more. The silence at that exact moment lasted perhaps 4 seconds. 4 full seconds of Walter Mercer holding that information and having nowhere to put it. Stephen had come up behind his father. He looked between us. "Dad," he said. Walter turned to him. His face was composed, but something underneath it was working. Recalculating, the way a balance sheet recalculates when a line item you thought was small turns out to be the whole column. I picked up my water glass. "Shall we sit?" I said. We sat. Dinner was served. The bread was extraordinary that night. The soup, the same soup I had ordered on October 17th, was perfect. Claire, seated between Daniel and me, leaned over at one point during the second course and said quietly, "Dad, did you plan this?" "I planned to have soup," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked away, and something in her face was very quiet and very full. Walter Mercer spoke to me 3 more times during the meal. Each time, his voice carried a different register than it had on October 17th. Not warmer, exactly. More precise, more careful. The way a man speaks when he has recalibrated and is not yet sure where the new measurements land. At 9:14 p.m., when the dessert course had been cleared, Walter walked around the table to where I was sitting. He waited for the moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology, Raymond." I looked at him. At that first dinner, he said, "I made some assumptions. I let the moment stay open." "You didn't correct us," he said. There was almost a question in it. "No," I said, "I didn't." He nodded once. His hands were folded in front of him. His face was, for the first time since I'd met him, entirely without performance. I picked up my coffee cup. "It was a very good dinner," I said. That was all I said. I drove home at 10:22 p.m. with the radio off. The road was wet from an earlier rain. The streetlights on the bridge made long reflections in the water below. In January, Walter Mercer called me to have lunch. Not at Maison Ferrara, at a diner on the east side. His suggestion, a plain booth with laminate tables and coffee in heavy mugs. He had thought about the choice. I respected that. We talked for 2 hours. He asked about the holding company, the timeline, the acquisition history. He asked without the performance of October. He asked the way a man asks when he genuinely wants to know. I answered him honestly and completely. Daniel and Claire were married the following April on the 14th, in a ceremony at a small chapel on Whitfield Avenue. I walked my daughter down the aisle. My hands were steady. My chest was full of something I will not name, because it does not need a name. Stephen Mercer shook my hand at the reception and held it for a beat longer than necessary. "I owe you one," he said. "You don't," I said, and I meant it. The sealed folder from the fireproof cabinet, Miriam's anniversary gift, the organized record of everything we had built. I finally opened it in February, 3 months after the engagement party, on a Sunday morning when the kitchen was quiet and the light came to the window in a long flat stripe across the table. Inside was a letter in her handwriting. It said, among other things, that she had always believed the work spoke for itself, and that she had been content to wait for people to listen. I sat with that for a long time. Raymond Holt, 63 years old, and learning, still, the difference between what needs to be said and what needs only to be true. There are men in this world who decide what you are worth before they know what you've built, and there are rooms where everything you ever made is in the walls. The beeswax candles, the bread, the staff who greet every guest the same way regardless of who owns the table, and those men will sit in those rooms and still not see it. The soup cost $11. The bread was included. What changed was not the price. I poured another cup of coffee on that February morning, folded Miriam's letter carefully back into the envelope, and put it on the shelf above the kitchen window where I could see it from the table. The maples on Creston Lane were bare. The sky was the specific gray of a February morning in this city, the kind you recognize the way you recognize an old voice. What you build in silence is still standing when the noise stops. What's the one thing you wish you could have said at that table? Or would you have done what Raymond did? Order the soup and let the room find out on its own. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.